Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. When I first started playing chess again, about 18 or so months ago, I used to play a lot of the Italian game, and that served me quite well, from ELO rating of around 800 all the way to a little bit over 1,000. So when I played this game recently against an opponent who I matched, who was somewhat lower rated than myself, who played the Italian game, I felt a strong sense of nostalgia and also quite a lot of empathy as well, because they made exactly the same sort of mistakes I used to make playing the Italian. So very typically would play the opening quite well, as you can see, 0-0-0, but then make some incremental mistakes in the middle game. Sometimes I wouldn't recognize why I made the mistakes or what the mistake was, but then eventually lose, with my opponent getting a very high accuracy and having a reasonably okay accuracy myself as well. So let's begin today, and I'm going to talk about this game from the perspective of 6 tips. 6 tips that will make you a better chess player if you are a chess noob. Let's begin. So the Italian, of course, begins with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop c4. Bishop c4 is the beginning of the Italian. In this game, I played the 2 knights defense. My opponent plays d3 and I played h6. And the h6 logic is to prevent these pieces from getting onto g5. They next play a somewhat unusual move, which is b3, but that's perfectly fine, looking to fianchetto their bishop. I developed my bishop to a pretty usual play, so bishop to c5, they fianchetto the bishop, and I now play d6, opening up the light square diagonal for the light square bishop, and now my opponent plays the first somewhat unusual move and probably wrong move. Now, if you look at this in Stockfish evaluation, they'll say that that move is potentially okay, but that's with this specific position. I think we should think more conceptually here. That is sort of a flailing attack at the beginning, before development's completed. It doesn't achieve a lot. So tip 1 is, unless there's a very good reason, finish your development before launching an attack. So here, my opponent attacks my knight, potentially I suppose pinning my knight to the king, but I asked the question, are they going to commit? What are they going to do? They're going to commit, I capture back, and at the end of it, what's happened? They've gotten my knight, and that is true, and potentially, damaged my queenside pawn structure. So it looks like maybe there's some benefit there, but very clearly I was going to castle kingside anyway. For my knight, they lost a bishop, which means they have also lost the bishop pair, while I still have the bishop pair. Bishops are probably better than knights, especially once you move into the middle game and the end game. So I'm not entirely sure that was the best trade. Another thing that might be a little bit invisible is that in the opening, that bishop moved twice, which effectively means that I've gained a step of tempo. It's like I've gained an extra move for the slight disturbance here to my structure. And I think that is actually probably beneficial to me. My opponent plays a a3, I suppose potentially sort of going to push with that attack with pawns. I can just block that with a5. My opponent now pushes the other pawn. So here, with this pushing of pawns, they probably should have thought about developing their other knight, probably short castling first. In this position, there was no reason for me to not short castle, so I did. Now my opponent cracks out d4. And now we come to tip 2. Be careful opening up the center before you've castled. So when you open up the center, the pieces can attack each other, and the king is an obvious target. Simply, the win condition of chess is, of course, checkmate, where the king cannot avoid an attack. So my king has already castled, which means once this center opens, it is likely to benefit me more than my opponent. So this is a mistake. And in fact, this is the beginning of a mistake that is likely to not be reversible for my opponent. And indeed, it wasn't reversed. So you can see it went from almost 0, 0, 0, so it's very slight advantage to me, to minus 2.44, almost 2.5, like they had already lost 2.5 pawns. So tip 2, be careful opening the center before you've castled. This move also brings us to tip 3, which is to make sure you've counted the trades carefully before you commit to an attack. Now, what do I mean here? That move, I win a pawn, they win a pawn back. I win a bishop, they win a bishop back, and now I win this pawn, which means at the end of that sequence of trades, I am a pawn up. So the sequence of trade advantages me, not the opponent, and so my opponent shouldn't have launched the attack. So tip 3 again, make sure you carefully count the series of trades, count the pieces before you launch the attack. Now, let's say you've made the move anyway, because sometimes that's definitely what I did. Even now, sometimes I miscount and the opponent captures the piece. In this situation, you have to pull back, pull out. Don't fall for a sunk cost fallacy or sunk cost fallacy thinking where I've already committed, I need to now complete the sequence, because that often is not good. Because here it's minus 2.4, but with my opponent continuing on with the sequence, it now drops to almost minus 4. Each move is individual, even if you've thought of the sequence. Don't fall for a sunk cost fallacy thinking. So they captured, I captured back, captured, and as I said, at the end of the sequence, I am a pawn up. So almost minus 5 now, minus 4.5 towards black. My opponent now forced, of course, to short castles, arguably should have short castled before, which means with my position, again, it's like I've got a move up. So Queen F6, now with a pin of the knight against the rook. Obviously, I can't capture straight up because it is defended by the opponent queen. Now, one of the potential strategies in the middle game is if you've got a piece that's pinned, place pressure on the pinned piece. So here, pawn up, extra pressure on the pinned piece, and in fact, my opponent cannot prevent this knight from being taken next turn. So they move queen e2, that doesn't prevent that, and of course I've now got an attack on the rook as well. They sort of place an attack on the queen with a pawn move, but that doesn't work, and it even comes with an attack on the queen, which of course it's a fork. They have to capture, I capture back. And one of the things I want you to actually have a look at is for a while, the queen and the rook, two high valued pieces, are on the same diagonal. That square is defended by my rook, which means there is a potential skewer. So tip 6, keep an eye out for the basic tactics like pins, forks, and skewers. You just have to keep an eye out for them. You can use them against your opponent, but also your opponent can use them against yourself. And once they've been launched, often because they're forcing moves, you don't have the time to extricate yourself. While if you notice them before, you can prevent them from ever happening. Now my opponent chases my queen, I take the pawn. Now they decide that they need to protect the pawn, but really they needed to get out of this potential skewer. They didn't see it, and so bishop to a6 with a skewer of the queen and the rook, and my opponent here opted to resign. So 6 tips from the beginning. Unless there is a good reason, finish your development before launching an attack. 2, be careful opening up the center before you castled. 3, make sure you count the trade sequence before you launch the attack. 4, be careful of sunk cost fallacy thinking. Pull out if it's not going to work. 5, place pressure on the pinned piece. And 6, keep an eye out for basic tactics like pins, forks, and skewers. Good game for this opponent? GG. There is one extra tip, which is to remember to have fun. Don't worry too much about your rating and just play. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching.